we're gonna start. We have a wonderful little crew here, a small tribe, which is lovely. I'm delighted to introduce Cynthia. Cynthia has been a phenomenal adventurer and has visited over 100 different communities from around the world. I can't even imagine not only the joy of being able to experience all of those different places, but how much you must have picked up, how much you must have learned, what works, what doesn't work, and just to see the variation, that diversity. And what I get really excited about when I hear regenerative villages and eco-villages is recognizing that every space has to have its uniqueness, the topography, the climate, the history, the heritage, the culture from the spaces, and what people want to bring alive in the world, and what is unique to each group of people who are gathering together and finding that true essence of a place. So I would love to hear about this journey. I'm sure everybody else would love to hear about it. How you discovered the variation with all of the different how co-housing and the tiny houses and the community land trusts and the housing cooperatives and all these different systems and all these different forms. Are there things and threads that you found that repeat themselves? Are there challenges that you find that you see that repeat themselves? And from that perspective, how do we find the space to find our home, our place, our belonging, from the type of matchmaking that I know you've been so good at doing for so many people. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Cynthia, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And thank you everybody else for coming to attend this wonderful talk.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun to connect with you all at Rebuild, and just really, glad that you're doing the work you are and bringing people together in this format. And hello, everyone. Really nice to see some familiar faces and meet new people. I am calling from Vermont in the United States. So it's 9:30 in the morning here, just getting the day started. But yeah, excited to share with you about my journey. And then the bulk of my presentation will be about different communities. And it sounds like we have a lot of people who are also knowledgeable about communities that exist. So I'd love to have time at the end. We're going, I think, until 10:30 my time, so about an hour from now. And I'd love at the end to, have some Q&A session, just general sharing about what you see as happening in the communities movement. Because like Jeremy said, it's super diverse, really wide ranging, and there definitely are threads that maybe weave things together and new frontiers as well on the movement. All right, so I will share my screen and jump into this. Okay. There we go. Okay, yes. So this is a presentation on intentional communities around the world, including eco-villages, co-housing, tiny house villages, and many, many more types of communities. I'm going to start by sharing about my personal story and the variations of intentional communities, the kind of a definition for intentional communities, getting into some research tools, but then really the bulk of the time will be spent showing you photos of communities that I've gotten to visit and connect with, and we'll do kind of this global tour. And then, as I said, having time for questions at the end. Okay, so I did not grow up in an intentional community. I grew up north of Boston here in the States with very loving and supportive parents, but they still don't quite understand what it is that I'm doing with my life. And maybe some of you can relate to that, being pioneers in exploring new ways of living, and how it can be challenging sometimes to communicate this to friends and families who maybe aren't as plugged into this lifestyle. But I got hooked at a pretty early age. I visited my first intentional community when I was just 15 years old. It was a place in North Carolina called Turtle Island. And I didn't know that it was an intentional community or an eco-village. These terms didn't mean too much to me back then, but I did recognize that this was very intriguing for me to see people living lifestyles that were very different than the suburban, mainstream, fast-paced culture that I grew up in, and I really wanted more exposure to it. So I began traveling, got my university degree at a school that enabled me to really travel a lot in Europe and visit many communities, got connected with the Global Eco-Village Network and later some other organizations. So slowly my passion also turned into a career trajectory, which has been just a joy to be able to give back some of the experiences that I've been very privileged to have and help other people along their community journeys. Some photos of some of the organizations, as I mentioned, the Global Eco-Village Network, also called GEN, which is very well known in Europe. But here in the United States, perhaps better known is the Foundation for Intentional Community. And their website is ic.org, the letter I, the letter C.org. But also New Mundo and Ecolease, and just there are so many people who have dedicated their lives and their professional careers to uplifting this movement in a variety of forms. So just a lot of gratitude to all of these people. Yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, thus far, I've gotten to visit well over 100 different communities in 22 countries and 31 of the United States. So yeah, a lot of places. And really what I've shifted into now is helping people to connect with the communities that I have visited or where I have relationships, and supporting those who are not living in community currently on their pathway to exploring this way of life. So I actually left my director position at the Foundation for Intentional Community last year and started this new company, Community Finders, and the website is communityfinders.com. And it is a resource for primarily people who want to find community, but also community builders. So I'll just share my contact information more upfront here. Would be happy to hear from any of you about what you are working on, what you're exploring. There's my email address, cynthia@communityfinders.com. And I do, as Jeremy mentioned, have this matchmaking service. So that's really like how I call myself these days, as a community matchmaker. And yeah, this is a person who, like a relationship matchmaker, would recommend communities that would be a fit for individuals and help to make that connection. Also, just throwing it out here, I haven't shared it publicly yet, but I am going to be posting a job opportunity for somebody who would like to join me in being a community matchmaker, because there's a great need, and there's a great need for people who have a lot of experience visiting different communities. So there's that. This is my home. This is where I'm calling from right now, Headwaters Eco-Village in Vermont. Our website is ecovillagevermont.org, I believe. I can share that in the chat later. This is what we're heading into, just gorgeous summer. We have a big garden, and this is what we've been coming out of, deep winter. We have very strong 4 seasons here, and we're a pretty small community, about a dozen or so families, but very plugged into this area and the town that's just within walking distance of us. So feels much bigger. And one of the unique things about our community is that everyone who lives here has built their own home. So when you join, you buy your land and then you start building your house on that land. And that's a little different than most communities where you're usually buying or renting homes that have already been built. You can see here in this way, we're very multi-generational, a lot of kids, and many of them are homeschooled, and just, yeah, they have a lot of fun. I'm so jealous sometimes. Like, I wish I got to grow up in this kind of environment. This is my house that is still under construction. It is a passive solar design. So we have a big greenhouse along the southern wall and a hybrid, I would say, of eco, high performance and natural building methods. You can see here, this is like a hempcrete / light straw clay wall. Yeah, and it's livable, but still a lot of work, especially on the interior. And now I'm focusing on the outside and landscaping. A lot of fruit trees coming at the end of the month, so I'm busy with that these days. And getting to build my home within community has been incredibly supportive. So much knowledge sharing building tools and materials. This is actually a photo of a neighboring intentional community here in my state. They came for a day and we did a work party. So yeah, just a lot of gratitude for getting to do this project in community. Also, I am very well connected to a small community in Slovenia. It kind of feels like my second home, where I spend several months out of every year and have for the last, 7 or 8 years. And I am, for the first time, going to be bringing a group to this community. It's called Sunny Hills of Istria in the Istrian part of Slovenia, a small country. A lot of you Europeans know where Slovenia is, but for anyone outside, it's a small country bordering Italy. They call it the sunny side of the Alps because there's the Alpine range, but it's on the southern exposure. And yeah, we'll be going in June for a 10-day adventure, visiting the different communities in Slovenia. And the website is ecovillagettours.com. We have 3 spots left. So if anyone's feeling the call to come join, you'd be more than welcome. Okay, so let's back up for a minute and just set some groundwork here. What is an intentional community? This is one definition from the Foundation for Intentional Community, that an intentional community is a group of people choosing to live together or regularly share facilities on the basis of explicit common values. So there are many definitions for what makes an intentional community. And for our purposes today, we're going to be talking about residential communities or place-based communities. Of course, you can have online intentional communities, but really focusing on communities where people are living together day in and day out. And typically when these places are formed, it's a founding group, 1, 2, 3 people or more, who lay out some very clear values, mission, vision for the project. And then later on, members who join buy into that same set of values. So it's really unlike maybe a retirement community in Florida, where sure, it's a community, but where are those common values that's binding the members together? Why live in an intentional community? I think if you're at this conference, you have some ideas for why this is a wonderful way of life, but I'll just touch on it briefly. So connection, we have a loneliness epidemic right now. Even before COVID, loneliness was on the rise, which has a lot of serious health implications. We didn't evolve as humans to live these very isolated nuclear family lifestyles that many of us do. We evolved in close-knit social circles. And so when we can have that feeling of belonging and connection, it just really brings a lot of health and wellness into our lives. Shared resources. Classic example is that not everyone needs to own their own lawnmower in community. That's just one small way that we can share and thereby live more lightly on the planet and have greater resiliency. Especially when you think about the COVID pandemic and how communities were able to respond. I think it was very mixed from some studies that we did. Urban communities had a hard time. compared to rural communities. However, most of the people that we spoke with through our surveying said that they were really glad that they lived in community while going through such hardship, and that it really helped to alleviate what so many people were feeling in terms of stress and isolation. So yeah, community support, co-creation, experimentation. Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to think that these communities are utopias. Anyone who lives in community knows that it's really challenging, and that sometimes you can think of these communities as microcosms for all of the bigger world events and challenges happening in society that shows up in community too. But in community, it's on a scale where we can talk with each other and work through challenges and learn. And for me personally, getting to spend time in communities has been tremendous for my growth as a human being. There's this expression that living in community, you're surrounded by mirrors reflecting back to you your growing edges, your strengths, your weaknesses, and having that feedback constantly and just being in a relationship is essential for being able to grow as a person. Oh, and fun. So in our community, we have a lot of kids, as I mentioned. So pretty much every month there's a birthday party and a lot of birthday cake and celebration and joy. So I have to include fun on the list. These are some of the terms you may hear to describe or to be included within the umbrella of intentional community. So sometimes people who are new to this, we especially see this with online researchers, they might be like, oh, communes, yeah, do the communes still exist from the 50s and 60s? And that's their gateway. That's the term that they use to then discover, oh, wait, this is a really broad movement. So just want to lay out these. I'm not going to go into talking too much about each of these terms, but I will do that when we get into the examples. If you would like to find out which type of community might be a fit for you, this is a fun little quiz. I don't know, 5 minutes or less, communityfinders.com/quiz, and it'll tell you based on how you answer which of a few common types of communities is your type. Where to find the more than 10,000 communities out there. And I put 10,000, it's really up for grabs, the exact number of intentional communities, but this is a number that's put out by the Global Eco-Village Network. It really depends on how you define intentional community. And I would love there to be more research to get more specific data on the number and kind of communities that exist. So IC.org, I'd mentioned that before, that's the Foundation for Intentional Community website. Really robust directory there. Also ecovillage.org for those of you in Europe or outside of the United States. I sometimes find that this has a little bit more, but check out both directories because they're both comprehensive, but different. And then cohousing.org for those of you who are interested in co-housing in particular. And I know there was someone here from the UK. There's also the UK Co-housing Association, as well as Diggers and Dreamers and a lot of other directories. So I actually, on my blog, communityfinders.com/blog, I have a list of 21 different intentional community directories and a bunch of other resources as well. So if you're looking for advice on how to visit a community or join one, want to put that out there as a resource for you. Okay, great. So now we're going to jump into the fun part, actually looking at some communities. Have a sip of water. This is a photo of Cloughjordan Eco-Village in Ireland. Really wonderful community that is right up against a traditional small Irish village, and then you walk down an alley and then you're in this eco-village appendix. And Cloth Jordan has won numerous awards for their ecological building design. They also have a co-working and maker space in the community, which is a cool thing to have. Okay, so I want to start off. Lately, I've been shifting to starting this tour by talking about what's happening in Ukraine. And we have Max here with us, who I'm sure would be a great resource, because as far as I know, you're one of the key people spearheading the whole organizing effort for supporting displaced people in Ukraine who are looking for refuge in ecovillages. So more than 60 ecovillages in Ukraine, but more than 300 ecovillages throughout Europe that have created this green road to help these people get out and get to safety. So just a lot of love for what's happening there, and I'm sure they could always use more donations and other kinds of support. So then we have the largest, arguably, intentional community in the world, which is Oroville, the universal city in India, with over 3,000 residents. And what you're looking at is the physical and spiritual center of the community, called the Matchmaker. 50 years ago, this was just barren land that then the residents slowly created into multiple neighborhoods and farms and food forests. This is a massive community and an amazing one to visit if you get the chance. Definitely a spiritual community, but with enough different pockets that you can find, a whole permaculture village. You can find a community that is a restaurant and promoting, vegan food. A lot of diversity here and well worth visiting. Another large community, so I'm starting with like the big names you've probably heard of before, Findhorn community in Scotland. With 600 residents, and similar story. 50 years ago, this was just sandy dunes on the rugged Scottish coast, and they were famed for being able to grow these giant cabbages, which they attributed to their connection with nature. And now is this flourishing community with a really large events hall where they host great conferences and programs. So Findhorn community is actually a sister community to Sirius in Massachusetts. Some residents from Findhorn came to the United States and started this community, much smaller, about 30 to 40 residents. I lived here for a year and a half. This is the community center with an octagonal shaped events hall and this big greenhouse on the southern side, which is where I got the idea for my house design. This is the largest eco-village in the United States, New York, in New York, and it has 3 different co-housing neighborhoods, a lot of forests and gardens and farms. Just kind of move through these kind of quickly. Earth Haven Eco-Village in North Carolina. I often will mention Earth Haven because they're doing great ecological work, but also for people in the United States or going to travel in the States, this is a really easy one to visit. And also they have a great short-term rental program and work exchange programs. Dancing Rabbit Eco-Village in Missouri is one of the communities that there's been the most research done on in the United States, really showing how this community has a fraction of the carbon footprint of the average American. And in part, that's thanks to their car sharing program. So when you join this community, you don't have your own car, but you're able to check out a car to use whenever you want. Twin Oaks community in Virginia. So this is an income sharing community, which is also known as a commune. So commune is really an economic term describing a community that shares some or all of its income and is typically very progressive and left-leaning more radical kind of community. Twin Oaks has been around for 50 years, so they've proven the model at this point. They have a tofu business, a hammock making business, I actually have one of their hammocks, and a large farm as well. So in Europe, there are a number of income sharing or commune communities as well. Most of them that I have encountered are in Germany, around the city of Kassel, Germany. Commune Ninderkoffen, I'm saying that right, is one of them that's probably one of the most largest and has actually been able to support a network of other communes where they can do resource sharing and economic sharing. So if anyone here is really into alternative economic models, checking this out could be interesting for you. All right, so now shifting to spiritual communities, Lama Foundation in New Mexico is perhaps one of the better known examples in the United States, where they're not denominational in any sense. It's not one spiritual practice, but it's really inviting in teachers from around the world. And they have a beautiful expression that community itself is the teacher. And this is why they're in community, is to really do this day in and day out practice of living the community way. Damanhur Federation in Italy. This is probably one of the most known spiritual communities in Europe. What you're looking at is a photo from inside a mountain with all of these tunnels and chambers that were built in secret from the Italian government for 16 years. And they are the temples of humankind, mosaics on the floor, murals on the walls. Really, really interesting place. And Damanhur is set up as a federation of different nuclei or micro communities that each has a particular focus. So one is focused on growing food, one is focused on producing energy, one is focused on the tourism and educational side of the community. Yeah, a little bit of, there's some shadow side at Damanhur for sure, but I have a lot of people, friends who live here and some who even grew up here and love it. So. Okay, so now looking at cohousing in particular. So cohousing is a term that was coined by two American architects when they were visiting Denmark and noticed this different form of community development. And then they brought it to the United States, and now there are more than 200 cohousing communities in the US, including this one, Pioneer Valley in Massachusetts, which you can see here really the classic layout of a co-housing community where parking is off to the side to allow for a more pedestrian-friendly center. There's this large common house. Many of the homes are duplexes. And one of the things that defines a co-housing community is it's based on a home ownership model. So sometimes we hear the word co-housing and we think, oh, everyone's sharing a house together. That's co-housing. No, co-housing is when individuals own their own unit, could be an apartment or a flat or a whatever, a standalone home that has its own kitchen and bathroom in addition to being able to share common facilities. So I have to show some examples from Denmark. I got to visit a bunch of communities in Denmark this last summer, and there are well over 100. I'll just mention this one. I don't even think I'm going to be able to pronounce this correctly. And this is one of the largest communities in Denmark, close to 500 residents. This is just one tiny neighborhood within this community that has several different neighborhoods. And beautiful, beautiful example of how to create new forms of cohabitation and community support that's very well welcomed by local municipalities and governments in Denmark. And I'll mention the Camp Hill Communities Network because there's also a very strong Camp Hill movement within Danish communities. And Camp Hill is a global network to support communities for people with and without special needs. So when you spend time in one of these communities, you'll be living with individuals who have severe mental and physical challenges and people who don't, and just a really beautiful way of creating inclusivity for some of the most marginalized members of our society. Okay, so more co-housing. This is the largest co-housing community by land acreage in the United States. So hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, and yet the homes are clustered and they share a parking garage. And this is so counter to the American, and a lot of developed parts of the world have followed suit, way of designing neighborhoods where everyone needs as much land as possible that's theirs and it's their property. And that's fine. But when you have a model like this, it enables everyone to have access to more shared spaces and leaving more of that space wild. PDX Commons, we had Franz, who was talking about senior communities. So I have a senior community. I could have a lot more because there are many of them. PDX Commons in Portland is a plus 55 intentional community, and it is designed around the needs for people as they age in place in community. And one of the things that makes it different from just a retirement community is the residents here, they own their community as a collective. They are responsible for caring for their buildings and their place. It's not some outside management, it's them. They make the decisions, they set the prices, and this provides such an empowering pathway for individuals as they age. And a lot of intentional communities are intergenerational, so many generations, but for some, they may choose to be in a plus 55 intentional community to have a certain environment and dedicated support. All right, so now shifting into the communities that are more mission-driven or service-based. One fantastic example is Canticle Farm in downtown Oakland, California, which is a very densely urban populated place. And you are just on a random street in Oakland and you see a bunch of row houses, but then you walk into the backyard of this one and you're in this permaculture oasis. They have done tremendous work to create homes for previously incarcerated individuals and people facing eviction or displacement through the gentrification that is happening in this part of California. So a lot of kudos to them. Similarly, I suppose, there is a handful of Indigenous-led community initiatives in the United States, and the strongest one I have seen is the eco-village created by the Masoke people in Alabama, who are returning to their ancestral homeland to create a community that celebrates their culture, their language. They actually have a section of the community where only their language is to be spoken so that the children can really grow up with a more immersive experience of their culture. And we have places like Queen City Co-op in Denver, where in many parts of the US, and I think it's true in Europe, there's very restrictive zoning around who can live together, how many unrelated adults in one house. And a lot of these policies are used to segregate poor or marginalized individuals. And so Queen City Co-op was the first in the city of Denver to really rewrite the zoning codes to enable more unrelated adults to legally be able to live together within one building. Got to visit them recently. It's very inspiring what they're doing. Yeah, and then similarly, Cooperative Community of New West Jackson in Mississippi, what they're doing is buying up dilapidated homes as a cooperative and then being able to provide housing to their cooperative members at a much more affordable rate. And resident-owned communities, or ROC network, I don't think anything like this exists in Europe. This is really a US phenomena because we have so many mobile home parks in this country that are owned by landlords or outside management companies that really can just dictate the pricing how they want and force people out as they want. And so there's this movement for residents of these communities to buy up their homes and create cooperatives so that they own the places where they live. And again, an empowering pathway for people who are very low income for the most part, and having them have a place within the intentional communities movement. Oh, and then of course, Traditional Dream Factory in Portugal. So now I'm going to shift a little bit to more of the, I don't know, cutting edge in terms of visionary or technological developments within community. And I'm not going to speak too much about this because we have people, I'm sure, in this gathering who can speak to it, Jeremy included, but others much better than I can. But this is a community that is a DAO, so decentralized autonomous organization. DAO is the acronym. And this is the first one in Europe, but there are a few in the States, one in Texas, one I think that's more dispersed. And these are communities that are experimenting with Web3 technology to allow for easier organizing and for residents to come and stay or not stay and contribute through a tokenized system to the community. So very cool what they're creating. And yeah, I hope to visit soon to learn more. Also in Portugal, probably most of you have heard of Tamara, which is a healing biotope. I love this photo. It's so gorgeous with the mist in the valley. And this was also 4 decades ago, a desert land that the community did massive waterwork projects to reforest and regreen this environment, and today is known as a experimentation center for all kinds of peace research studies and regeneration studies and open sexuality studies, just really innovating in a number of fronts. Los Portales in Spain. So this is a community also not too far from Traditional Dream Factory, maybe a 5-hour drive south. And Los Portales isn't as well known as Tamara, but is also, I think, in a quieter way at the front edge of a lot of community developments in terms of fostering simple living in the country in a really beautiful part of Spain, close to Seville. I'm also looking forward to visiting them this summer. Okay, so now getting into some additional alternative modes of community development. I want to highlight Finca Morpho in Costa Rica, which is a small community, but they have really more and more transitioned to being a nomadic community and a hub for nomads that's based on a seasonal pattern of organizing, because in Costa Rica, there's the rainy season and the dry season. And so they've shaped their community to allow for people to come and go and plug in this very fluid way. So it's a cool model if you want to check it out. Also in Costa Rica, so this is going to be the Costa Rica segment. You have places like La Ecovilla, which is a very rapidly growing community, very large. They just purchased a whole other section of land. I believe they're at 100 or so families right now, and they're going to expand to 100 more. And this is a model of community that we are seeing a lot in places like Costa Rica, of expats primarily who can build these very lovely homes and have, yeah, a version of community that is definitely community, but also is a development model and has a very strong enterprise component to it. So yeah, just showing again some of the diversity here, and there's pros and cons, of course, to all of these different models. Another example in Costa Rica is Pachamama Eco-Village. So this is a spiritual community or a retreat center community. And we're also seeing a lot of these kinds of communities in desirable parts of the world for a vacation or a yoga retreat. And they're really just lovely, with a school for the kids and their own restaurant not too far from the ocean. And yes, they host a lot of people for their retreat programs. Another example of a kind of destination community, Piracanga Eco-Village in Brazil, is right on the ocean front. Very remote, difficult to get to, but like, oh my gosh, sublime in terms of being able to relax in this eco-village oasis with many different retreat centers that make up the community. So there are a number of communities, especially in Europe, that have re-inhabited old structures. Torre Superiore is a great example. This is a 13th century stone village. You walk through, there's chamberways and arches and passages, just you feel as if you step back in time. And they've created a thriving eco-village here. Similarly, there's a much newer, smaller community, Vidalia Cooperative in Spain. This is an old mill not too far from Barcelona, and they've created just a sweet cooperative, very focused on movement and the arts and different ways of self-expression, and are, yeah, creating a community within this old mill. Also, a good example of re-inhabiting old spaces. This tower here is part of a castle that is over 1,000 years old in Germany, kind of central Germany, Schloss Tondorf. So there's a lot of communities in Germany. There's like, oh gosh, 50 or more. And a lot of them begin with Schloss, which I think means castle. And they are forming communities in these old structures. And this is actually on a hilltop overlooking a valley where the community is very involved in fostering community development projects throughout the whole region in Germany. And they also have a kindergarten for the small children. They have this orchard. Yeah, just sweet community example. Freetown Christiania. So this is a community that re-inhabited a old military base in the city of Copenhagen. And you can see they've done this like a crazy artwork everywhere, very much an artist and anarchist kind of community. And I went to visit this summer, and it was interesting. There is a section of the community that I think gets a lot of headlines in the news in terms of the weed sales and maybe a little bit more of the sketchy environment or strong politics. But then there's these parts of Christiania, because it's such a big place, that are just delightful neighborhoods with playgrounds for kids and little tiny houses. So if you get the chance to visit, which I encourage you to do, to see an example of an urban community, just make sure you spend time really investigating and walking around. And then this is the last example as part of our global tour. I want to leave us with the example of village building convergence, which is a festival that happens every year in Portland, Oregon. They took a few years off for the pandemic, but they're back this year. And this is a movement to do intersection repair. So this is an intersection of a street, and the residents are coming out to paint this giant mural and build a cob bench on one corner and set up a free library stand on another, and maybe a tea nook on the other street corner, and really do what's called placemaking. So my goal in my work is actually not for everyone to just up and move to new intentional communities, but to recognize that we all live in community already, with different degrees and shapes and forms and strengths. And so what can we do to strengthen the places where we live right now? What can we do to foster more connection and bring more placemaking back to our homes? All right, so that's all I have. I think we have, yeah, good. We have a good amount of time for some discussion and questions, and that's my contact information again. And if we don't get to everything today, feel free to write to me. All right.
Amazing. Thank you, Cynthia. Wow. What a selection. It was wonderful to see that we actually have like a number of those who'll be presenting tomorrow in the village pitches, and some today around village DAOs, land-based DAOs and things like that in the prosperity stage. So, and great. Thank you for the feature for TDF, for Traditional Dream Factory. Do we have any questions from our audience? If you like, maybe put your hand up and I can pin you.
I just want to say thank you. That was an amazing around the world tour that gave an overview of quite comprehensive overview. So I really appreciated that tour and learned quite a bit. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And one thing I'll say too, you probably noticed I did not have communities in Africa or Oceania, and there are communities there. I just was kind of tailoring it to what I thought the interest might be for this group, and also communities that I'm more familiar with personally. So, yeah.
Any questions?
Yep. Nicola?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. Hello from Costa Rica. And I would love to ask about what are the biggest challenges that you have noticed across your journeys and visiting different cultures and different communities? And also, particularly, I am interested in how did you notice that these communities were dealing with these challenges and actually dealing with the conflicts within the communities, if you have insights into that?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So the most joyful thing about living in community is the people. The hardest thing about living in community, the people. And I think that conflicts in community are just, it's part of it, you know. Conflict happens. And if you visit a community and they say, oh, we don't have any conflict, that's a red flag. Because it's not true. They're pushing something under the rug. So I would say that most of the challenges that happen in community are around finances, building permissions, pets, disagreements around placing things, a whole collection of different issues that can arise. But I think at the core of it is having a culture that fosters healthy interpersonal relationships. And there are a variety of tools to support people in developing some of the skills to learn how to be in relationship with each other in healthy ways. Nonviolent communication, different forms of governance like sociocracy, like Tamara community and Zeg in Germany, having a strong culture around the forum and social processes that we can do to strengthen our relationships, authentic relating. There's a whole collection of tools. I think what it boils down to is having a culture that supports good communication, frequent communication, especially around tensions, and that everyone who lives in a community is understanding that conflict will arise and happen. And it's not a problem, actually, if there's conflict in community. The problem is when a group isn't able to move through it quickly enough and come out through the other side having learned some lessons. So some good practices is for a community to have a clear conflict resolution policy in place. Usually this looks like an iterative process where, okay, you and I are in conflict. Step one, we try to work it out together. If that doesn't work, we invite someone else in as a witness or as a facilitator. If that doesn't work, it goes to a bigger group and then maybe a bigger group. And so there's this really clear process for slowly bringing in other elements of support to help us move through the conflict. And in addition to that, having a culture where feedback can be exchanged. And like, if I notice something that's even just like a tingling of a tension, I feel comfortable going to you because we have that basis of a culture in our community where that's okay. It's okay to share things when come up because we're not afraid of conflict. We're thinking of conflict as a tool and to help us move forward and learn from each other. So, yeah, great question. I really like that.
I mean, honestly, that's actually like just beginning to get us into some of the real crunchy stuff. But thank you so much. We're going to have to call it. We need a few minutes, unfortunately. Sorry, Franz. We have another session starting in a few minutes that we need to get set up for. So I'd love to thank Cynthia for all of that amazing juiciness that we've got from around the world, all condensed into a speedy little adventure. It's been wonderful to learn about all the different types of diverse spaces and places and ways of being. So I thank you very much for your time and your presence. From all of us, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And looking forward to meet you in Sunny Hill this summer. It's just around the corner here.
Oh, great, great, fantastic. Good, thank you. All right, everyone, stay in touch and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Coming up next on the main stage, we have the wonderful Ollie, who's actually going to show us an amazing technique where we can use synchronized light and synchronized sound. When combined together, it can change our brain waves. Here he comes right now. It can change our brain waves and get us into a different brain state, an alpha, beta, gamma, delta, different brainwave states of creativity, life, sleep, everything. And it's very exciting what this is bringing to the world. So I'm going to let you get a quick pee break in, and then we'll meet back here on the in 2 minutes. Bye everybody, and thank you very much, Cynthia.